Welcome back to this week's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm really excited for this next segment, partly because we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but also because I think there's something that's just been on my mind. And I've had a conversation with our next guest about this a number of times in thinking about how students are working on the college essay. Now, my next guest is Christine Sawicki, and she's joining me here from Portland, Oregon. Hey, Christine, I want to welcome you because you're on video and so people can see you, but I've got more to say. Hi, Christine. How are you?
Hi, Ian. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. We were talking about students are really, it's mid-October. And I think it's been a tough year for students, getting more comfortable with getting back in school, just changes in expectations about what the workload has been. And that accumulation of pressure and work has, I think, caused a lot of students to push their work on their essay off a little bit. Has that been sort of part of the experience that you've seen in conversations that you've had with families over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I think there's been more of a delay in getting work started, and the momentum has been building slower this year than in past years. I
Yeah.
think likely as a result of the transitions you just mentioned of being back in school full time.
And because of that, I think, usually we wouldn't have a segment on the personal essay in the middle of October, but we also perceive that a lot of students are in the process of writing their personal essay or even brainstorming their personal essay at this moment. And when it becomes hard, I think, to conceive of what this essay is supposed to be, students will often turn to examples. They want to see what is a good college essay. And so they look online for examples. They'll read the Costco essay, right? If you have heard of the Costco essay, you know what I'm talking about here, which is an essay a student wrote all about going and visiting Costco, and she got into a number of top schools. And we've been talking a little bit about examples, Christine, in the context of college essay writing and why there are some problematic aspects to this approach for students. Do you tend to show your students examples when you are working through the initial phases of the essay process? Let's pretend we're not even in October, but like just early on. What is the role of essay examples in your practice?
Yeah, they're fairly non-existent in my personal practice in working with students. The heart of the personal essay is the student. And so I like to put actually the prompts to the side, any expectation of what this essay should be to the side, and always begin with a personal reflection with the student. And if a student comes with preconceived notions of what it is, with examples in mind, I like to break that down, because if they are writing for what they think it should be, they're missing the very first most important piece, and that this should be all about you and in a place where you feel like you can write in an authentic way.
I think that's really key, is that when you start asking questions of what is this supposed to be, you're getting outside of your strengths already. And you're making a lot of assumptions about what you perceive a quality essay to be when you haven't really been in an admission office. You haven't really looked at those essays and you haven't been a part of that decision-making process. Now, examples, I think, people might be wondering, well, why can't examples help? I mean, I saw that there was this essay that was posted online and this kid got into Harvard and they wrote this essay. So this essay got them into Harvard, right? Or why doesn't that work, Christine? What is wrong with that assumption?
I think the particular Costco essay that you mentioned said, that she got into 5 schools because of this essay. And I think the subtitle should be, well, maybe she got in despite having written this
It's
essay.
true.
You
Yeah.
don't know the greater context that's around it.
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's a binary decision, right? Like if you apply to a college, you get in or you don't. But there is nothing in that letter that says, we really liked your essay. We weren't so impressed with your grades. We wish your scores had been higher, but your essay was really like, there's none of that information. And so students always assume, I think, because the essay is the closest thing to this application, that it is the most important thing.
Yeah.
When in fact, it is important, but your 4 years of grades are more important. Like the things you do outside of the classroom are more predictive of what you're going to do at the college level. And so a lot of students will say, I got in because of my essay, when their essay isn't all that good.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think kind of more problematic in what I see when students look at a lot of examples is they lose the confidence in their own voice and how they're approaching writing the essay. They feel that they need to have a gimmick or a perfectly circular ending that brings something back together, or it needs to be as funny as what they read. And all of these expectations dampen their confidence in their own writing that they're doing, and that just defeats the whole purpose of this essay, which is where you should feel proud and authentic in what you're delivering. So I think if students are to approach looking at examples, it should only be after they have done some reflection and thinking about what they want to say, how they want to deliver it. And maybe there might be some little great eye-opening ideas that might come from looking through examples, but it shouldn't be the driving force of what an essay should be that is a good one.
And I think we've talked previously about the importance of reading in terms of informing writing. And I think that you can sometimes get inspired by something that you read, or a particular thing touches off in your mind, like, oh, that reminds me of something that I can write about that's connected to my life, but not structurally, and not in terms of the form, and not in terms of the style that's being used. And I think another trap of the example essays is that people don't publish example essays that are fairly normal, that feel simple. They publish the ones that are riskier because it's like, oh, well, this must have been the reason. This is such a crazy essay. This must be why the student got in. Well, actually, the student was the point guard recruit. And so the coach really wanted him on the basketball team, and that's why he got in. So you have to be cautious, because when I'm publishing a book of essays, I'm not going to publish a bunch of essays that look fairly similar to each other. I'm going to want to publish essays that are really outrageous and have humor and are unique in some respects. But a lot of these essays, when we were talking about this previously, can be great writing, great pieces of writing, but not necessarily great college essays. You want to talk a little bit about the distinction between a good piece of writing and a good college essay?
Yeah. I think sometimes those can be one and the same. You can have a great piece of writing that is also a great personal essay.
Yes.
But I think that you can have a great piece of writing that misses the content that is most relevant to an admission officer's perspective for the purpose of why this essay is being written. I think a real classic example is a wonderful essay that reflects deeply on your childhood, and admission officers aren't so concerned about when you were 6 or 7. They're interested in a more contemporary version of who you are today. So a great essay about 7-year-old you is not going to be nearly as effective as perhaps a less creative, more direct delivery of a more contemporary you.
Yeah. And I think that kind of comes through in that Costco essay a little bit, is like, there's this history of this person's experience as she makes her way through Costco, and it's meaningful to her. But to me, this reads a lot more like the kind of essay that I would read in a writer's workshop, where we're working on creative nonfiction essays, stories from our childhood. I wrote an essay on my last game of Little League that I think was really great and nicely written, and I really enjoyed that process. But I would never send that to a college, even though it was written well, because it doesn't tell them anything about who I am now. You're asking too much of your reader to try and pull out features of your identity from a story that happened years and years and years ago. When you were reading essays, and you told me before this, can you get in there that I've read like 11,000 essays in my career? And I was like, yeah, way to make that happen. So Christina's read over like 11,000 essays in her career. When you're reading essays, what ultimately is the product of that read? So you read through the content, and then it shows up somewhere in the application. How does that show up? What was your practice of taking written content from a student and then putting it into a form that could be interpreted for an admission decision?
Basically a one-line takeaway. So when I am summarizing a student, the personal essay was about being an outside the box thinker as demonstrated through a robotics project, for example. A crisp takeaway that can remind me of the essay and to bring in other readers to know what that content was. I would say there's a secondary purpose. Occasionally, I would read some voice of a student within an admission committee. And so I might highlight a particular part of the essay that was particularly poignant or relevant to that takeaway so that the student was present there. But that one line takeaway is the primary feature.
And I think that's so important, so important. Because if you don't have that, if you don't have clarity as the author of what that is, then it's going to be very hard for the admission officer to have that sense of clarity as they're putting that into the application process. Mm-hmm. And what I have found, Christine, is that the students that come to me who have looked at sample essays, who are thinking about this project as something that needs to be creative, that they need a gimmick, that they've got to have this grabby beginning because that's what they've seen in all of these sample essays, they are so focused on the project of executing the essay that they're not thinking about what that takeaway should be, what the outcome of that process is going to be. So we spent a lot of time here talking about what students shouldn't do. And I think we are both really, I am like you in my process, which is that I really want it to be student-centered. I don't look at the prompts with them. We do a brainstorm that's fairly open-ended. I kind of feel like anything you write can fit any prompt that a Common App is offering. But what can students do? I mean, I have run into some scenarios, even this year, with students who just say, I don't know what a college essay is supposed to look like. And it makes sense to turn to an example when you don't know what that is. And I think sometimes my explanations for a college essay can be unsatisfying to a student. Well, it's going to be about you, and you can highlight things from your life. And they're just like, come on, dude, like, give me something that I can read. I'm a visual learner, right? So what can students do if they're in this position? They don't quite know what to do.
Yeah, I think that the source of where you go for those essays is of utmost importance. And I think college admission offices seem to be producing a lot more to assist students in this process. And as an example, Emory has a wonderful 5-part series of essays that their admission process liked, with the admission officer comment about why they like that essay. Yeah. And so I think that is just a great example of a quality source where you understand that this is an essay that is more related to the positive admission outcome, and you can see inside of the admission officer's thinking as to why. And I think that why is more applicable to your own essay than just reading a sample.
So Emory has samples like these. I think Johns Hopkins has some essays that they've called out that they think are quite effective. We have noticed, and I think like you can be a wonderful writer and someone who's really great at coaching students with writing and supporting their ideas. But there is something that is really essential about being in an admission office and understanding how the essay intersects with the admission decision and fits the application. That is really key. For us, we just sort of say, listen, I know what I'm talking about. I've read these not just because I read essays, but because I made admission decisions. And so when we talk to you on the podcast, anytime Beth is here or Sally, or we have our guests come on and talk about essay writing, we are talking about it from a place where there is an intersection with that decision outcome, which I think is quite different from looking at a piece of writing and assessing whether it's effective or not based on what you perceive that process to look like. And it's a little bit of us. I'm kind of tooting our own horn here, but like that's why people tune into our podcast is to hear a little bit of that perspective. I had a question with respect to that idea. So I'm a student and I go and look at some of these samples and I read what these admission officers have to say. As I'm reading through and writing my own essay, what am I looking for? How am I assessing whether I've done the job of finishing my college essay when I don't have Christine looking it over and giving me that feedback?
Yeah. I would go back to that takeaway and ask yourself if the takeaway is clear, or have someone read the essay and say, what is the takeaway? If you had to write a 1-sentence, this essay is about. What is that from reading this piece? The second thing I'd say is do an authentic check. Does this essay sound like me? Am I using vocabulary that is natural? Does my personality come through in the way these words are coming together? And that's where, a close friend or a family member can be great at giving you that perspective of this sounds like you. And if it sounds like you, the takeaway is clear. And thirdly, you're proud of what you've written, then I think you've got the makings for a great piece.
In my writing workshop, my teacher was very fond of saying that you'll have paragraphs that you'll write that as paragraphs you'll really love. You love the way you use this adverb or this turn of phrase that you use. You're really proud of it. But then when you look at the piece as a whole, you realize that paragraph doesn't fit. That it's really not part of that story. And so one of the hardest things about revising and editing essays is being honest about the fact that I love this paragraph I've written, but it doesn't help my central message. It needs to go. I need to get rid of it. My piece is stronger without having it in there. And I think that that's a challenge. It's like you can fall in love with some stuff as you write it, and that's great. So, save it in a file, go back and look at it if you want, but the essay has to have that tight central message that you're referring to. And I think I would add just one thing is that central message also has to be something that is relevant in the context of what a college is looking for. Absolutely. So they are trying to get a sense of what kind of community member and student and contributor you're going to be. And so you want that takeaway to be more than you're wonderful at baking cakes, right? Like that could be a clear takeaway with a voice that sounds like you, but it's probably not something that is a central idea that colleges are looking for. But if through baking cakes, you've developed a community of people who you support within your school by bringing them goods regularly, that could be a takeaway that talks about your ability to be a cohesive member of a community and bring people together. Man, we have so much more to say, don't we? I think we're out of time essentially, but is there anything else that you want to add, especially for these late starters? I mean, for students that are listening to this when it airs on the 14th of October, they're quite a bit later in the process. Is there any kind of words of encouragement that you would offer for them as they're staring down this process?
Yeah. I'd say to just trust your story that you want to tell. And
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't want you to stop talking. You could say more.
Trust your story and make that takeaway clear. Those two things I think are most essential right now.
I love that. I mean, that sense is, I think we should shout that at every senior who's writing. Trust your story and who you are, what you have to offer. Like bring that confidence into what you have to share. Don't let that doubt trickle in there where I saw this other essay and I need it to be as good as that one. Forget that. Trust yourself, trust your story. That's a great place to leave it. Christine, that was great. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Yeah, maybe we'll get you on again. When we come back, we're going to talk about merit scholarships and how to track them down. So don't go away.